kick them and they would actually hurt. That would hurt. But these little bitty characters, Diana, you guys saw one. It was a little cat with his head off, but he was smiling. It was about a dream. Anyway, it was a little nutty. They're a little different. They're not toys. But what I started to do is, well, if I'm going to go this far, I've got to have some guides. But they're going to be humble. They're going to be little bitty, you know? And so in an installation I'm working on towards Bergdorf Goodman, these little guys are going to be in their windows walking around with these gigantic paintings of nothing, you know? I don't know if I'm going to get the project. They like the portfolio, they like the proposal, but I'm going up to New York in 4 weeks to try to swing the deal, baby. So what ended up happening is these little guys started to become real. And then if you saw in the hallway, I started to make films about my process, where I wanted to see how long it would take to get a project into a museum, or at least do a project in a museum. It took exactly 5.5 weeks, about 100 phone calls and countless emails. But this is the flowchart of what happened. So what started to happen is, it started with a conversation with Nancy Fullerton. I was like, Nancy, wouldn't it be cool if, like, I painted a painting in front of a painting in a museum in an optimal setting? And she's like, it's kind of funny, actually. I'm like, could I paint in a museum? And she's like, I don't know, Rex, maybe. Call someone on Monday. So I started to call. I started to chase the rabbit, and it kept going and going and going, and I just was like, oh, I'm a grad student, so this is part of my grad degree. And they're like, oh, cool, grad student, you know, go for it. And then everybody already knew me already. They're like, you want to do what? I'm like, well, you know how everybody's looking at freaking iPhones all day long? Like, that's all you see in the world. It's like through this little screen. Bruce will tell you about it. This is the world we see now, not this world. So I said, screw that, man. There's a big world out there. I want to go paint in the world about the world. So instead of reading all these layers of, dude, I'm reading like theory books that are like this thick. They're bigger than the Bible. There are no pictures. And it is all figured. And I'm just like, okay, people, whatever. This is some dense stuff. So I said, well, I'm going to make it realer than real. Like, I'm going to paint in front of a painting, the Frank Stella Double Scramble, and I'm going to put myself in the optimal light, like the Impressionists. They were trying to capture light. And I'm going to plein air paint. And then I'm going to have my little guardians around me, which are little toys. If y'all watch the video, there's those little toys everywhere. It's just like a Mike Kelly kind of weirdness thing. Anyway, I won't art nerd out on you, but they were like my little guardians. And I was like, all right, sweet, I'm going to paint this painting, baby. So I started to paint it, and I had this preset idea. Is this getting boring or is this weird? Okay. So the little panda has come to life. And I'm explaining it to you right now. I wish I was actually that big, and I was a little cartoon. That'd be really cool, actually. So anyway, I totally lost my train of thought. Oh, I was painting in front of the painting, my interpretation of the painting, instead of looking at like static images or reading theory. Like I was in it. And then what ended up happening is the second painting I did, the paintings actually started to really soak in. So when you're around like an Ellsworth Kelly or a Frank Stella, and you spend 2 hours with one, it really starts to soak in why these guys are hanging there. And you're just like, oh. And it started to literally like glow. And I don't mean like in a weird metaphysical, like transcendental whatever. No, the pain really was like, dang dude, you're good. You know, like, and when I was in that thought process of painting, that's a very different thought process than, oh, I'm looking at a painting. You're actually in like, you guys are writers, creative people, you know, you're a DJ, you know, like when you're in that zone, you know what I mean? Like, you kind of see the world differently, you know? And so as I started to see the world differently, my painting started to change. So if you see the little painting, there's one that looks like a bunch of lines. It looks like kind of a Frank Stella. Then the next one looks totally different. It's painted on burlap. And it's very specific. It's a very humble material. You know, like, it's about being humble, you know? My whole perception of the whole reason I was doing everything I was doing changed from business flowcharts and an interest in the way social dynamics work to holy mess, this is really good stuff. Like, I understand now why this is hanging in a museum, and I'm really honored to just be standing here doing this, you know? So, one of them was like a reverse Banksy, meaning I'm working within the system towards something. And then on the other end, I just ended up in awe of how amazing art can be. You know, coming from the story of the janitor, getting into the museum painting a project, and then almost studying all this stuff from a very, I hate to say it, esoteric kind of look at life, which is graduate school. You're writing papers about what you think you may do someday when you have time to paint it, perhaps after you write the papers about it. You know? But anyway, that's kind of a look into what all this is, you know? And we made it a private event because we wanted it to be small and just people that I knew and stuff like that. So, talk, mingle, mix. And welcome. But y'all have already all been here. Well, most of y'all have been here.
Do you want to answer any questions?
Yeah, any questions? Sorry, I always back off on the question thing. Questions?
You've been standing at number 7 for a while and you've been gesturing towards it, but give us some background on that particular print.
Well, what ended up, print's a good
Not print.
No, actually that's a good, because it kind of, well, I can see how you read that because of the registration. And that's, you hit on something really important, process and printmaking. Notice the context? Like Paul and I were painting this, he's like, you keep drawing context in everything. Whenever you draw a context into something, it changes it. If I were just to do this stuff on a paint without these lines, it would be a very different painting. It may seem like something very small, but in fact, it's like the most important part. And I freehand a lot of the lines. So,
it's amazing to see him do a line freehand. It's just, he just does it.
it's kind of nuts, like, but it's actually, my dad used to do it a whole lot, and I watched him as a kid, and now I actually see how cool it is. I used to be like, why is my dad doing this? Dad, I'm not just blowing sunshine your way, like, it was actually cool. So you're the influence for the line, actually. There, you heard it. I'm never going to say that again.
It's recorded.
It's recorded. Yeah. So what ended up happening is with this painting, I started to drain all the color out. If you kind of notice the color bars are like on the bottom. And I mean, y'all know my super hyper ridiculous panda paintings, you know, big flying donuts, craziness. Well, it's like all of that drained and became very hyper concentrated. Like this is like Japanese kid epileptic seizure color stuff. You know what I mean? Like these are as high key as you can get on the color spectrum. So what happened with these is it was like all the characters, all the narratives got hyper compressed. And in that intensity, all this opened up. And I'm painting with like 10 different shades of white. I don't know if it's like Robert Ryman, you know, like kind of like obsession with the color white. And what ends up happening when you start painting with all these different house paint, acrylic paint, oil paint, high-end paint, really super expensive Japanese paint, wash, you see all these different shades of white, which is kind of nuts. And this thing, and there was a pinhole in the ceiling of the millworks, like 40 feet away, and it just went pow, and I was like, ooh, that's cool. Like, can I capture that intensity, you know? And that's why that's called camera obscura, because those 3 little circly thingies are actually from the sun at the mill again when I was just painting. So a lot of these, I point towards this one and this one because this one came after this one and the line turned into a circle, you know? And then the circle broke apart again over there and they just became these little like things on a canvas. But I could paint these all day long, man. Like, these are like my narratives, you know, like I love it. And what I love about them is I don't have to say anything. Like in grad school, all my students that I'm with are like, dude, just like duct tape your mouth, man. Like you're thinking about so many things that it's overwhelming, and I love it, but I can't see the painting.
But I think the reduction from prior series that you've had and the minimalist content as compared to what you had before ties definitely with the humble.
Oh, dude, like it's all about humility. Like, painting is the most useless thing on the planet. Like it truly. Bruce, at least you can do something with a computer. You know what I mean? Like, the title of some of these, they're not here, but I started to mess with titles, which is called Stupid, which this is kind of dumb. It's not a smart way of doing anything. You're using the most rudimentary utensils. It's a bucket of paint and a sail, which is where canvases actually came from. They were Venetians. They said, oh, we painted on panels, now we can chop our sails up and we can actually transport our paintings. So it's called stupid, not in a derogatory way, just in a matter of fact. Humble, meaning painting on burlap, painting on raw linen, taking kind of this approach that's somewhat scary. Because as Gerhard Richter said, you kind of hide behind your paintings, and you really do. Stupid, humble, ego. They're huge. I mean, come on. If I was really humble, I'd paint them like this big. So I'm not really, So stupid, humble, ego, and then paintings. Stupid, humble, ego paintings. So the breakdown is all about this completely rudimentary thing that, for whatever reason, a janitor passes by and almost breaks down crying because he's wondering why all these people are paying $40,000 a year to get this degree. And then you see what it's really about, which is a person's life. That painting's actually Bruce Lee in his jumpsuit. If you study the life of Bruce Lee, it was really fabulous. And then, sorry to jump to something else. Before I jump to Bruce Lee, is there another question?
No, go with Bruce Lee.
So Bruce Lee, guys, grad school is about overanalyzing everything. So, I was like, well, I don't really paint paintings, I paint people. I paint thoughts that are in my life and things that I read about. It's not really painting, it's all these other things. And I really liked the person of Bruce Lee, and the more I studied about him, the more I found out that he really truly believed that martial arts would really help people, for real. He's like, oh man, this will merge East and West. And his teacher, Ip Man, was a guy that believed that it could unite China, and it did, sort of, with Kung Fu. But Bruce Lee said to Ip Man, your problem is that you're only thinking about China, why don't you unite the world? So Bruce Lee went over to the West, us, and you gotta understand about Kung Fu and stuff, if you lose at a battle, you can't teach anymore. So if you say, have you noticed Kung Fu movies I challenge you. No, I challenge you. Fine, I challenge you. Everybody's like, oh, they challenged them. You're like, what's with the challenge? Well, when you actually break it down, if they lose, they can't teach or they're shamed. And that's a bad thing. So Bruce Lee came over here, started to teach, and he challenged the idea that Kung Fu could only be taught to Chinese people, which at the time, it was actually only for the upper class. It was only this very elite, listen, Kung Fu, Jiu-Jitsu, all this, whatever, the different forms. This is very Chinese, and this is very much about our elite construct. You cannot go to the normal people, especially not go to the West and teach them. He's like, fine, I'm going to go do it, And he did. And he failed. But then he started to go, dude, the limiting thing about this is I have to be there physically. What if I started making films? I'm going to make films. Everybody watches films. So what Bruce Lee did, well, he got kind of caught up in all the movie star thing, but for real, the driving force behind him was that I'm going to show Kung Fu to everybody. And I don't have to be there anymore. Just watch my films. And when you start studying Chinese film, did you ever see Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon? People are running up trees and running over water and all that. None of that happened in Bruce Lee's films. That was a really big no-no in the Chinese pantheon of film at the time because they liked that. That is part of their social construct. So, yes, all that thought process went into that painting about his jumpsuit, which if you notice in his films, he's always wearing a yellow or a red jumpsuit. And he said, this is the everyman jumpsuit. Anybody can wear this thing, and anybody can do what I do. And the cool, someone said it tonight, you keep jumping from material to material or subject to subject. Bruce Lee jumped from every fighting style you can imagine, and then synthesized it all together. So much so that he took a bamboo reed, and he's like, ha, ha, ha. He's like, come on, take me on with a bamboo reed. And people are like, what? He's like, pow, and he just beat the crap out of this guy with a bamboo reed. And he's like, I can even take this reed, this simple little thing, and turn this into a tool. Anybody can do this. So I bought the canvas at a craft store. There's actually such a thing called dyed canvas, which is awesome. So I bought the canvas, stretched the canvas, painted the painting, and then that little bit of like, hiya, a little bit of yellow, is like the chi. You know, it's like the, you know, the little, it's the stuff you can't figure out. And then again at the bottom, that's that condensed intensity. And the one next to it is called like, I don't know, Be Like Water, My Friend. And that's, dude, you read about these guys and now you know why they are who they are. It's like, good Lord, I thought you were just a movie star. And then you're like, no way. So if you guys have all wondered where in the world I started to make films, it's because of Bruce Lee.
I think that the everyman in the world is similar to your desire and tying back to the original opening of your lecture, which was that you wanted to be able to have a janitor enjoy art and experience it. And so the parallel is there, which is why you have the Bruce Lee.
And my thesis is called a social aesthetic, which people are like, wasn't that like relational aesthetics? And I'm like, no, not really. Relational aesthetics was a movement in the 90s, well, 80s, 90s, that was like, well, let's just bump the whole system of everything, and all we're going to make art out of is food and like get-togethers. Well, the guy was already famous, and that's super cool if you're in every biennale possible, but if you got to sell paintings, you got to sell paintings. So I call it social aesthetic because I think in the same way that this flowchart happened, you know, it started with a very casual conversation with Nancy Fullerton, kind of a funny idea. And then with a little bit of time and a context, you know, the context, it actually turned into something very cool. And I've started to jump into a YouTube channel to try to learn how to make film. Because everybody's always like, I wish I could put you in a little box and like explain this stuff, you know, because you got so much stuff running through your head all the time. I'm like, I'm just gonna film it. You know, so I'm trying to work with two of my friends in editing and literally just running around with my iPhone, which that's my mom's case. I still haven't got a new case, but I kind of like the case. It's kind of nutty. I totally lost my train of thought. Nutty case, film. Yes,
twice.
I'm going to film. No, sorry guys. It's getting worse. Y'all are in the arts, you know how it is. So what ends up happening is all the paintings come back to the common man, you know, which is how does everything relate, no matter how lofty or interesting, how does it boil back down into something? And that ends up coming out in my world in the little cartoons and big paintings of nothing, you know. But in reality, after you've heard all this stuff, there's a whole lot condensed into that little thing, which is totally kosher by me, you know. Anyway, any more questions?